next segment with program is going to be New Opportunities with FBS Software. Dr. Martin Traviolia is going to have a presentation on enhancements to the software. And welcome Martin to the program.
Are we on?
Yes, we're on.
All right. So I subtitled this A Little Older, A Little Wiser, because when I did the presentation last year, I'd been with FBS about 6 months or so, so now I know a little more than I. So I'll talk a little bit about the new features we added. Early in the year, you saw the veterinary feed directive, so that you can store your directives that you get on the system and associate them with your groups. We didn't advertise it too much, but Transaction Plus supports large imports now, at least for checks. You can, used to the limit was 200 lines. Now we'll take very long ones and break them up into multiple 200 line entries. The one that I think will impact folks that are buying scanners in the future is that we added support for network scanners. So your scanner no longer has to be attached directly to your PC. We implemented it on Egg Compass this year because it requires a new ActiveX control. In order to get it on your PC, it needs to be on the distribution disk, so everybody else will get it in 11.2. I've been working on reporting performance for a little bit. It's been an interesting experience. Smart Feeder, we got a general speed up of about twice what it currently is, and that actually is released, so you should be seeing the benefit of that. In addition, we took a look at the feed valuation performance, and we've got it to be about 6 times faster. So there are some limits that I'll get into. Part of what we've learned in reporting is that we need to drive on to some other software changes to make the reporting even more effective. Hopefully everybody in this room had a positive experience with the 11.1 upgrade. It had some technical improvements in it, and it caused some problems. We went to the Jet 4.0 database, and if your Office configuration on your PC had been messed up, we found that out. We have a fix, and if you want to understand it, get a copy of the presentation. There's a reference to the Microsoft page. For better or for worse, sometimes your Office configuration on your PC gets messed up by various programs. We're one of the programs that gets affected when that happens because we use Access. The other interesting thing that took quite a bit of effort to deal with was server message block. What we have found is that starting with Windows Vista, Microsoft has been enhancing its communications for multi-user systems, the communication between the client and the server. If you're what they would call a legacy application, some of the enhancements they've made can cause very strange things to happen. Files can disappear, changes may be delayed. Turns out that there's some relatively simple changes you can make to the registry to turn off those features. We have a patch when someone experiences that problem, we distribute it. In 11.2, we're going to put the patch on every client PC that we install on. Basically, if you run without it, your experience might be okay, but at any point in time, you can start seeing weird behavior. So that took us a while to figure out, but I think we finally have a handle on that. Yeah?
Is there a way for us to tell whether we've installed that patch already or not? We are
actually, you can, if you go to that link, it'll list the 3 registry variables, so if you're comfortable looking in the registry, you can see if they're there or not. If you don't have them, you can contact Sarah. She's got it's the SMB one. But yes, there's a way you can tell. For folks on Ag Compass, you saw this year. Hopefully it was relatively transparent. I know for a few people it caused some problems. We went in basically and changed all of the code that opens and closes files to reference a configurable enterprise folder that we now put the data folder under. You're probably used to seeing FBS install the data folder under the program directory when you install it. That too can cause problems. So what we've started doing is identifying FBS to Windows as being Vista compatible. And if you don't do that, Windows assumes that you don't work in a multi-user system and starts copying files around so that it's hard for the software to actually two PCs to change the same file. So, but on the Ag Compass server in particular, what that causes is we need to make sure we can keep people separate before it happened by default.
Back to your scanner comments. Can FBS work with ScanSnap now? No.
What?
It says a proprietary format, not the other.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's the issue. Yeah, your scanner's got to be, what's the, I forget. Yeah, Twain, thank you. The acronym escaped me. It's got to be Twain compatible. And it's got to produce like GIF or PDF. So, anyway, I got a picture here. What this means is when we talk about that shared data enterprise folder, for your current configurations, they're going to work fine. When we install a new computer starting with 11.2, we'll actually be setting that folder up explicitly whenever it's in a network scenario. And I'm kind of showing you this local network picture here. That's where the SMB protocol fix comes into play, is whenever you're networking computers together. And this will give you a preview of the 11.2 installation options. There's going to be a little drop down here where you can pick your configuration. You can pick standalone, network file server, or network client. And we use the same disk in 11.2 regardless of whether you're client, server, standalone configuration. It's just that you need to pick the configuration that's appropriate. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about development priorities, and kind of as a preface I want to talk about what drives our development priorities. So for Greg and I, you know, the number one thing is fixing people who are down for whatever reason, so or programs that don't work for whatever reason. Another driver of what we do is sales. Usually sales involves answering questions or figuring out if there's an interface or how we can build it or so on. We also do customer requests, so if there's something you want to see in FBS, ask for it. And then there are some product development things we do, whatever Norm dreams up for the market. And then there's maintenance. And the reason I bring this up is because there's a maintenance item related to reporting and other things that's rising to the top of our list. And it's going to cause some issues. So, in our current priority list, you see server stability, which we think we've pretty much addressed. Reporting performance. Valuation from purchases, we make good progress on. Date cache exchange, since FBS can do both cache basis reporting and accrual based reporting, the calculations for the cache basis report are quite calculated or complicated, and it's one of our slowest running reports. In order to speed it up, we're going to need to make some changes to how we organize the report, organize the data. And I'll get to that in a minute. We have an issue with importing newer versions of Excel. Because of the age of the software, it's tied to some older ActiveX controls that don't support newer versions of Excel. On the web dashboard side, we're going to do some enhancements to the web dashboard. We're looking at automatic updates. We're seeing issues to where we fix something, but the customer still has the problem because their system hasn't updated. So we'd like to make it more like your antivirus software, to where the updates just come down and patch automatically. This one's probably near and dear to some people's hearts, is moving the setup files into Access. Because of the history of the software, some files in Access are in Access, and some, primarily what shows up as setup files on your menus, are still in just flat files that are harder for reporting software to deal with. And then I have my pet peeve up here, which I get to talk about, which is making the user interface more mouse friendly. I think I make people nervous when I talk about the user interface, so I put this up here in bold caps. We're not going to change your ability to enter data from the keyboard. So the software is pretty optimized around the concept of you want to bang data in, and you can do it from your keyboard or your keypad. You can hit the enter key, move from field to field. I'm not trying to change that. As a matter of fact, I think there's some things we can do to make it better, such as supporting the Control-S key combination to do a save, which we don't currently do right now. But my pet peeve is if you look at this input screen, if you click with the mouse over here, what should happen is that drop down should just get dismissed. But that's not what happens. Because of how the keyboard logic works, you get your mouse pointer repositions down here on this field, which now has the focus, and it drops down on you. So it took me a while to figure out what was causing this. I knew it irritated me, but I couldn't figure out why it irritated me. And then I realized it's because it's moving my mouse pointer around and making it do something I didn't want it to do. So as we work on these programs, we're going to fix that. All right. This is what I alluded to in terms of talking about priorities. Right now, FBS is a mixture of Visual Basic 6 code and VB.NET code. Actually, most of it today is VB6. VB6 is an older language from about 1998. We tried a conversion to, if you remember the 10X series, we tried to do a .NET conversion. The problem was it was too slow. There's some reasons for that, which I think we understand now. So on some of our benchmarks, the 10 series was 3 times slower than the 8 series. We've kind of turned that around with some new work we've done. We're pretty confident that the 10 series will be at least the same as VB6 in performance, if not faster. We have some benchmarks where it's twice as fast. The other issue we have with VB6 is it keeps us tied to the JET database. So we're stuck basically in Access 2003. If we want to use a more modern version of Access, it's too hard to get there with VB6. And VB6 is part of what ties us to old versions of Excel. If we were in .NET, VB.NET, we would have access to Microsoft libraries for interfacing with Excel, and we could upgrade our versions. And in looking at improving the reporting performance, there are changes that can be made to the reports, but because of the age of the language and some of the language features, it's harder to make them as a developer. in VB6 than it is in VB.NET. So part of what I've done to speed up the open group report has been to basically design some custom objects specific for that report so that they accumulate data efficiently or they look data up efficiently internally in the program. The other thing that we've experimented with is doing less disk I/O, and the problem we have is that to do that we'd like to take every piece of data that we read and just keep it in memory. VB6 has an inherent limit of half a gigabyte. The programs would have run fine, but they would still run fine on a 20-year-old PC because they don't require a lot of memory, which is good, but it also affects how they're organized and what the performance is. So what we want to do is make them use all the memory that's available in your PC. So if you have a 4 gigabyte PC or an 8 gigabyte PC, you can get the benefits of having all that memory available because your reports will run a lot faster. So to get there, we need to finish the VB.NET conversion. So over the next 2 years, we're going to gradually be replacing the the VB6 code with VB.NET. In release 11.2 in October, one of the things you're going to see is we're going to take the feed valuation performance and include it in all the smart feeder reports. That's pretty straightforward for us. It's mostly a testing issue. We're going to make sure the SMB patch is applied on all workstations. We're going to put out a .NET version of the FBS main menu. If you ever look at the link on your desktop, it's fbs.exe. And we're going to put out a .NET version of the check for updates. We want to address some issues that we've discovered in our update program that some of them are intentional, but Greg and I weren't aware of them. I think Dan probably was. Like, we can't add more software to your PC. We can update it, but if we want to give you a new file, right now the update program doesn't support it, and we'd like to do that. And then in 2008, we'd like to make sure we include newer versions of Excel in at least Transaction Plus import. We'd like to release VB.NET crop audit reports. That just happens to be the area where I did the most initial research and I'm the closest to being ready. In 11.3, which would be a year from now, we'd like to have completed the migration of the setup files into the JET databases. We really want that automatic updates working. And we would like to be able to convert you to the enterprise folder if you're an existing implementation. If you remember that picture you saw earlier where I had the enterprise folder on the server, that's not how your servers are configured now. If you went through the default installation, and that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. Software will continue to run in that configuration. But what we'd like to move towards is to where everyone is sharing a data folder and all the programs are installed locally on the PCs. We're having a problem with updates in particular because our systems are getting larger. There's more and more users. That when you try and update your system, even though you think you've got everyone logged off, they're not all logged off. Turns out there's some features of Windows that even though you've exited FBS, Windows might still have that file open, and we have problems with updates. So if your software is installed locally on each client PC, those issues go away. So we'd really like to get to a configuration to where it's shared data on the server and FBS installed on each client PC. But we're going to make that gradually. It's not going to be a required change. but we want to support a conversion in 11.3. And then the really big change was by the time we get to 11.4 in October 2019, we really want to be powered by Microsoft Office Access. You'll start seeing that logo show up. It's a Microsoft licensing requirement when we move to later versions of Access. But that we'll be using at least Office 2010. And just so you understand, we have to compile to the oldest version we support. If you happen to be using Access like 2016 on your PC, the software would work with it. It's just it won't use any features newer than 2010. But Access is not really where we want to end up for large server configurations. Access is really kind of a halfway point. If you have a handful of users, Access works well. But when you start getting into the 5 to 10 user range, you really need to be looking at going to a SQL-based database that's fully featured. And so we're going to target in May of 2020, kind of a halfway release, is to take our 11.2 version that came out or 11.4 version that came out the previous October and have an SQL database version of it. What we're going to push, though, is that, what we're going to push those that you're on pretty current hardware and software. Since we're a relatively small shop, we have a we'd like to limit the amount of effort that we have to go into to support multiple configurations. Like we'd like to, if we can, have only one version of SQL Server out there that we're supporting. And in particular, there's a feature in Windows Server 2016 and Windows 10 that support what they call containers. And what it lets us do is build the Access server at FBS and deliver it in a container that your IT folks can install and that they don't actually have to configure. It's pre-configured, and no matter how they've configured your server, the SQL server thinks it's running on its own server by itself with its own configuration that's independent of the server's configuration. So basically, we can put it in a container, ship it to you, you can install it, and it'll be working the same everywhere. But in order to do that, we need to have you on Windows 10 or the equivalent Windows Server 2016. The other thing is, we're gonna be all 64-bit on the high-end installation. That will let us use really all of the available memory. The 32-bit ones are still limited by the size of the 32-bit address space. But we don't want to force anyone to be upgrading their software and hardware. If you really want to stay on Windows 7, you're really on a 32-bit machine, and you don't really want to invest in upgrading at that point in time, we're not going to force it on you. Any questions? Okay.
Do you have any development priorities? Requests? We've laid out the big picture, but
I have one. I can talk to you later.
okay.
No, there's the new computers don't have a CD drive. And I need to deliver other than that.
We would like to be able to deliver without the CD. We can do that now. Informally, we've been transferring
file that we can use to drive installation. It would require a little more infrastructure work on our part, but what we could do is set up a website and give you like a customer number that you could log into and set up a password and then download software. We'd like to get the update process nailed down, because right now, in order to fix the update program, we have to ship you a new disk. The new version of update will be capable of updating itself. And we'd like to get that out in the field and have that ready. So, from a conservative perspective, me being comfortable, not wanting to break a lot of systems, we'd like to at least ship a CD for 11.2 and probably 11.3. But at that point, I think we'd have enough infrastructure in place that we can safely draw some goods.
Well, we already have some, and we can do them on one at a time.
We can't do it. I understand this is a support issue. Right.
Any other questions for Martin? So that concludes today's program.